My name is Mikaela Nhondo Erskog. I'm a member of the No Cold War Coordinating Committee, which is a peace platform that's trying to promote different forms of exchange between people across the world and discussions around critical themes around calls for peace, building lasting solidarity networks, and basically trying to confront some of the warring tendencies in the world when right now the world more than ever needs to be seeking forms of cooperation and collaboration over war and militarization. I'm also a researcher at Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. So I'm excited to host this discussion. I'm really interested to hear what all the speakers have to say, who are all accomplished peace activists, thinkers, public commentators in their own right. And so I think we're going to get straight into it. But I would like to remind everyone that part of the reason we had this event is that at Tricontinental, we did a collaboration and produced a dossier on the role that the US is playing in destabilizing East Asia. And that prompted us to try to bring different voices from across not only East Asia, but as well as the Pacific, who are people who are leading voices in terms of calling for peace and organizing for peace. And so we thought that prompted by this discussion document, we could have a fruitful discussion and try to kind of understand a little bit better what the situation is, but also to think about what are the pathways forward and what needs to be done in terms of people who are active in the peace movement across the world. So our first speaker is going to be Dae-han. He is a No Cold War Coordinating Committee member alongside myself. He was also the author of the text that I mentioned, which you can find at thetricontinental.org, and it is available in quite a few different languages, so do check it out. And Dae-han is also a member of the International Strategy Center based in Seoul, and he will be starting our conversation by giving us a kind of broad historical overview of the US and the role the US has played in East Asia based on the dossier. So each speaker will speak for about 8 minutes. We will then have a second round where we have some concluding remarks for 3 minutes. And so I hope the discussion is fruitful for all those participating as well as those who are in attendance. So I'll hand over to Dae-han now for 8 minutes.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me. So my presentation is gonna be based on the dossier that I've written, and I think the idea is to provide a broad historical overview of the U.S.-led order in East Asia in particular, and hopefully the other speakers can expand to just kind of it's specific to Northeast Asia, but hopefully other people can expand to just kind of East Asia as a whole. So just to get started, I think the United States and Japan, the two strongest mobilizers for war in the region, state that their military exercises and militarization protect the regional rules-based order. But the news rarely ever asks what this rules-based order is. So what I want to do is kind of explore what that is and what should peace movements do about it. So first, the rules-based order is not the UN-based international order. That's because the US has not actually adopted the conventions that it claims to uphold, such as the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Permanent Court of International Justice. In fact, the US rules-based order is a system from which the US is exempt and in which the US decides which rules to enforce and against whom. As the most powerful country emerging after World War II, the US played an outsized role in creating East Asia's current status quo. In the current regional order, Japan was never held responsible for its imperialist exploitation, destruction, and killing. In fact, to quickly prop up Japan as a bulwark against communism, the CIA propped up Class A war criminals into what would become the Liberal Democratic Party, which has been in power nearly uninterrupted since 1955. Furthermore, in 1953, the US excluded Japan's greatest victims, China, Taiwan, and both Koreas, from the peace negotiations. So to understand the impact of this, we can contrast Japan's handling of its past with that of Germany. In contrast to Germany's efforts to reflect upon its past, the Japanese government still refuses to acknowledge their atrocities, including the sexual slavery of up to 200,000 women, 80 to 90% of them Korean, and overwhelmingly teenagers, is conscription of hundreds of thousands of Koreans as soldiers and labor in factories and mines, as well as countless others throughout the region. In addition, little is acknowledged of how Japan used Okinawans as human shields against invading U.S. forces and then forced them to bear the overwhelming majority of U.S. military occupation. Secondly, in this regional rules-based order, the U.S. also arbitrarily divided the Korean peninsula. There was no cultural, historical, or social justification for the division. Furthermore, in its southern controlled area in South Korea, the U.S. squashed grassroots democratic efforts and propped up a government composed of a reviled minority of elite Japanese collaborators. After the normalization of relations between China and the US in the 1980s and the fall of the Soviet bloc in the 1990s, North Korea actively sought normalization with the US. Yet, despite these attempts, peace in the Korean peninsula has been thwarted by US machinations for regional dominance and containment of China. In the Taiwan Strait, the US intervened in the Chinese Civil War, allowing for the emergence of a separate KMT government in Taiwan that would carry out its white terror on the island for nearly 40 years, executing around 3,000 civilians and imprisoning and torturing hundreds of thousands more. So the U.S. intervention sowed the seeds of division and tension in the Taiwan Strait today. So this is a little bit of the historical background behind the current regional order. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the normalization of relations with China, and the attempts by North Korea to normalize relations, the U.S. has continued to maintain these divisions. As such, the old Cold War never really ended in Northeast Asia. Today, the U.S. is exploiting its bilateral military treaties across East Asia to keep the region divided and to contain China. Yet this strategy is coming up against China's growing assertiveness and confidence in the world stage. As part of its containment strategy, the U.S. pressured South Korea to forsake its claims for justice and reparations from Japan, to establish the JACUS Security Cooperation Agreement, that is between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. And what this agreement does is that it reorients each of these countries' military postures from their own self-defense towards entanglement in a regional conflict, right? Their shared intelligence and anti-missile systems would be incorporated into an integrated missile defense system to neutralize China's counterattack missile capabilities. And this, in effect, puts a target upon their backs in the events of a conflict between the United States and China. And it's important to dispel the notion that advanced anti-missile defense systems can protect a country from missiles. In a contest between the two, missiles have an advantage over anti-ballistic interceptor missiles. That's because anti-missile technology is like shooting down a bullet with another more expensive bullet. It can be simply overwhelmed by shooting many more cheap bullets. And beyond carrying out joint military exercises and increasing their interoperability, JACUS also forces all three countries to consult with each other when conflict erupts. This makes it even more difficult to disentangle oneself in the case of a U.S. conflict with China over Taiwan or the South China Sea. In order to justify this aggressive posture, the U.S. uses North Korea and Taiwan as pretext. Despite the fact that North Korea has pursued a peace treaty with the U.S. since the mid-1990s, the U.S.'s broken treaties have not only made peace less likely, they have pushed North Korea towards safeguarding itself through nuclear bombs. In the Taiwan Strait, despite formally recognizing that there's only one China and that the and that its government is in mainland China, the US continues carrying out provocations, sending high-level officials to meet with separatists, sending more weapons, and navigating US war vessels across the Taiwan Strait. In the face of such escalations, we need a regional peace movement. The first step towards this is greater solidarity and exchange like today. There has to be a greater common understanding about how US actions and policies are understood and felt by each of our movements, countries, and communities. In addition, we must move away from abstract notions of war and peace and root ourselves in history and in the concrete realities and struggles of frontline communities that are directly suffering from the increasing US militarism. At a time when the drumbeats of war are pounding louder, peace movements need to raise a common voice calling for peace. To do that, we need greater exchanges and relationship building, such as today, so that we can find common areas to struggle together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dae-han, and thank you for giving us a kind of historical overview. I think you also touched on many of the regions who will speak in more detail about the impact of the US and their attempts to destabilize East Asia and other parts of the world.